Chapter 15. A Trip to Sunagaku. Naruto and Tayayu stood in Tsunade's office as they waited for their mission. Little did they know that they weren't going to enjoy the mission in the slightest. Tsunade looked at the two of them. So we have a mission for you both. Though only one of you was specifically requested for the mission, you two are a team, which means that if I deploy one of you, then I deploy both of you. Though, Naruto isn't going to be happy about the mission in the slightest. Naruto looked at her. Why are you playing coy, Ba-chan? Tsunade sighed. Enter. The door flung open. Naruto-kun. Naruto shivered at the voice. It was the Sand Daimyos daughter, Suki. Naruto looked over his shoulder to see that she still had a fit figure, but she was nothing compared to Tayayu. Of course, in Naruto's mind there wasn't any woman that compared to his red-headed girlfriend. Naruto looked back at Tsunade with pleading eyes, begging her to not send him on this mission. Tsunade shook her head no, and Naruto sighed. Hello again, Suki. Suki smiled and ran to the blonde-haired man, trying to wrap him up into a hug. That was where Tayayu stepped in though, blocking her with her foot as she stood between them. Suki looked at her. Tayayu. What are you doing? Tayayu looked at the Daimyos daughter. No one is allowed to touch my boyfriend. Naruto-kun is mine and no one else can touch him, right, blonde? Naruto nodded his head. That's right, Tayayu-chan. Tayayu nodded her head as she looked back at the Daimyos daughter as she started to pout. She looked from Tayayu to Naruto, then back to the red-haired Kunoichi. Suki looked at her with pleading eyes. I will give you any amount of money for one night with him. Tayayu rose her eyebrow at her, then started to tap her chin. Any amount, huh? Naruto looked at Tayayu with a worried expression. Tayayu-chan, you're not considering this, are you? Tayayu looked back at him and smirked. What if I am, huh? Naruto looked at her with a worried expression still, then leaned in, kissing her cheek before whispering in her ear. I will do anything you want if you don't pimp me out, Tayayu-chan. Tayayu looked at him. Anything you say. Naruto nodded his head, then looked back at Suki. Sorry Suki, but Naruto-kun is not for sale currently. We will see next time you see him. Depends on if he is being a good or bad boyfriend. Naruto's eyes were the widest at that point. He usually gets in trouble for things he doesn't completely get. He was often called a bad boyfriend by Tayayu as well, accompanied by a barrage of smack to the back of his head. Tayayu smiled at him. Remember our deal, boyfriend? Naruto nodded his head as they looked back at Tsunade. Same as last time, you are simply escorting her to Sunagaku. This time though, Gaara has requested that Naruto stay in Sunagaku for a week. Naruto nodded as well as Tayayu, then they looked over at Suki. Give us 10 minutes to go and get our gear, then we will meet you at the front gate, okay? Suki nodded her head and then was escorted by the captain of her personal guard to her carriage. Naruto and Tayayu both ran to their homes and grabbed their bags after packing for the necessary days. They meet back at the gate with a couple of minutes to spare. Suki and her carriage came rolling up after that. Tayayu, will you sit in here with me? Tayayu looked from Suki to Naruto, who gave her a nod saying that it was fine. Tayayu climbed up into the carriage and then they were off, planning to stop in the land of rivers for the night. Tayayu sat in the carriage with Suki, who was glaring at her. Tayayu rose her eyebrow at her. What is it that you want, Suki? I assume it has something to do with my boyfriend from the look on your face. Suki simply nodded her head. Last time we met you said that you had no interest in him. Tayayu blushed a little out of embarrassment. Well, I was kind of lying to you at that point, Suki. I was trying to deny the feelings that I felt even to myself. We were just friends at that point though, so I didn't completely lie to you. Suki sighed as she looked out the window as the carriage moved. I had even agreed to my dad meeting to him, try and get his approval. Such a shame, really. Time has definitely been good to him, hasn't it? Tayayu, though not appreciating that another woman had been looking at her boyfriend, had to agree. She had noticed it as well when he first came back. Time had definitely been good to her man. Tayayu smirked a little. Yeah, Naruto-kun definitely became more muscular and attractive while he was on his training trip. Suki smiled and nodded as she looked back at Naruto, who was walking behind the carriage with a bored expression. He was simply just looking up at the clouds. Are there any other guys in your village that are like him? Tayayu looked at her. Since Naruto wasn't able to hear them, she could be as honest as she wanted. Well, she thought that he couldn't hear her. Curiosity got the better of him almost instantly and he was channeling chakra to his ears to hear inside of the carriage. Tayayu smiled. There isn't another person like Naruto-kun in the world, Suki. Sorry to be the one that has to inform you. I am sure though if you look hard enough you can find someone that is close enough to him. Naruto smiled as he walked behind the carriage and he held that smile for the rest of the time he walked. Tayayu and Suki talked about different things here and there. Naruto had been listening the whole time. The information that he was getting was just priceless. Suki looked at Tayayu. So do you ever want something other than a ninja life, kids, husband and things like that? Tayayu looked at her. Well, if you asked me 4 or 5 years ago then the answer would have been, fuck no, but now. I don't know. I can't say that I am opposed to the idea. Suki smiled at her, especially if you have a certain blonde man that is the one who asks you and provides you with the kids. Tayayu blushed as she looked out the back window at Naruto who was still looking up at the clouds. She couldn't see the massive blush that was on his face that was even worse than her own. Tayayu looked back at Suki. If a certain blonde-haired man was the one who asked and provided then I definitely wouldn't mind. Suki smirked. I think that you are in love, Tayayu. Tayuyu's eyes widened and she was almost as red as her hair. Shut up. Naruto was walking outside of the carriage with wide eyes and a red face that matched Tayuyu's. Naruto kept his pace though now deep in his own thoughts. Tayayu-chan loves me. Naruto focused on that thought until the escort stopped in the land of rivers. Naruto set up the fire and started to cook the food for Tayayu and himself. Naruto just stared at the fire though, not even snapping out of it as Tayayu sat down next to him. She shook his shoulder to make him refocus. Hey, you okay, blonde? Naruto blinked and looked at Tayayu, a small blush on his face. Yeah. I am fine, Tayayu-chan. Tayayu noticed the blush though. Why are you blushing? Am I really that beautiful, blonde? Naruto smiled at her. Yes, you are, Tayayu-chan, but that isn't what is doing it. Tayayu looked at him with a rose eyebrow. Then what is? Naruto rubbed the back of his neck. She wasn't going to like this in the slightest. Naruto laughed sheepishly. Well, I was kind of listening to your conversations today. I heard everything. Tayuyu's eyes widened then narrowed on him as she smacked him on the back of the head with a blush. Bad boyfriend, you're not supposed to be a eavesdropper. Naruto looked at her. I couldn't resist, Tayayu-chan, but what you said, is it true? Tayayu looked away from him. I don't want to talk about it. You owe me one thing and that is what I pick. Naruto looked at her and then nodded his head, looking back at the fire. Okay, Tayayu-chan. Tayayu looked back at him. She knew that he wanted the answers but he just wouldn't push for it. He never did when she wanted to change the subject. Tayayu sighed. I may have meant them. I may not have though as well. Naruto looked at her. I thought that you didn't want to talk about it, Tayayu-chan. I don't mind not talking about it if you really don't want to. Tayayu looked at him. I don't want to talk about it, that is why I didn't give you an answer, blonde. Understand. Naruto looked at her then shook his head no, she did give him an answer though. Naruto shook his head some more. Whatever you want, Tayayu-chan, I am going to go and lay down, okay? She nodded her head as Naruto made some clones to do the watch for them as Naruto entered his tent. Tayayu had watched him leave, then looked around to make sure no one was looking before entering his tent after him. Naruto was laying on his sleeping bag with his eyes closed when he felt a pair of lips touch his. Naruto at first thought it was Suki, making a move on him and pulled back. When he looked and saw his red-headed girlfriend he gave a small smile. Well, this is unlike you, Tayayu-chan. Tayayu looked at him and pushed him back onto his sleeping bag and smiled as she gave him a quick kiss. Tayayu pulled back from the kiss and gave him a kiss on the cheek. Shut up and enjoy it then, shithead-kun. Naruto sighed. That name again. Tayayu kissed his neck, getting a small moan from him. It's your special name from me, isn't it? That means that I get to call you it whenever I want to. Naruto put his arms around her before turning her onto her back and kissed her lips gently. Tayayu put her arms around him and pulled him closer as they kissed for a while before falling asleep. For the first time ever, they shared something that resembled a bed. When they woke up in the morning they finished the trip to Sunagaku. When they got there Gaara and Temari met them at the front gate. Hello again, Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto smiled at him. Hey Gaara, hey Temari. They both smiled as they nodded. Tayayu then spoke up. Hello again Kazekage-sama, San Skank. Temari and Tayayu both glared at each other, making Naruto and Gaara both sigh. Naruto put his arm around Tayayu, pulling her closer to him and away from Temari. Naruto looked at his red-headed girlfriend. Be nice to Yuya-chan. The red-headed Kunoichi rolled her eyes as she looked at him, then over at Gaara. So why are we here for an extra week? Gaara looked at Naruto specifically. Akatsuki, they are supposed to be coming here for me within the week, so I wanted some backup that I knew I could trust. Naruto nodded his head as Tayayu rose her eyebrow. So, you call for aid from another Jinchuriki, the people that they are hunting? Gaara looked at her and nodded his head. I know there is a hole in the logic, but I also know that Naruto is one of the strongest and most capable shinobi that I know. I would be much more comfortable having him here to back me up as well. Naruto nodded his head at his red-headed friend. Of course Gaara, you know that you can always count on me. Gaara nodded his head. I had made reservations for you. Since Suki only requested Naruto to be her escort, I didn't make a reservation with a room with more than one bed though. Tayayu and Naruto both blushed at the comment. Naruto looked down at Tayayu. Sounds as if I am sleeping on the floor then Tayayu-chan. Tayayu nodded her head at him. You aren't going to be getting me into bed that easily, blonde. Naruto looked at her then nodded his head. Well, she slept next to me last night, didn't she? Naruto and Tayayu both walked into Sanagakure to go to their reservations at the hotel. Tayayu though had a devious smirk. Tonight will be fun, Naruto-kun. To be continued.